You begin far from Rome, in the dry light of the Syrian desert, where the city of Palmyra rose like a mirage made permanent. Palmyra was not meant to be a capital of rebellion, it was a trading city first, rich because it sat between worlds. Caravans came from Persia, Arabia, and India, bringing silk, spices and stones that passed quietly through its colonnaded streets on their way to Roman ports. Rome tolerated Palmyra because Palmyra made Rome richer. Rome also tolerated Palmyra because it stood as a buffer, a place that absorbed pressure from the east, so Roman legions did not have to. Zenobia was born into this arrangement of convenience. Her full name was Julia Aurelia Zenobia, a name already shaped by Roman habits. She was educated, fluent in Greek, familiar with Latin, and proud of a claimed descent from Cleopatra of Egypt. Whether that descent was true mattered less than the fact that she believed it. In the ancient world, belief in lineage carried weight. It gave a ruler confidence, and confidence often mattered more than proof. You can imagine Zenobia not yet as a queen, but as a woman learning how power worked in small, careful steps. Power was not dramatic at first. It was the slow learning of who spoke in council and who remained silent. It was understanding how tax records were kept, how caravan routes were protected, and how treaties were worded so that everyone could later pretend they meant something different. These were the boring details of rule, and Zenobia paid attention to them. She married Odenathus, the ruler of Palmyra, a man Rome considered loyal. When Persian forces under Shapur invaded Roman territory, it was Odenathus who pursued them after the Roman Emperor Valerian was captured. Rome called him Corrector of the East, a title that sounded impressive but also revealed something important. Rome was no longer fully in control of its eastern provinces. It relied on local rulers who understood the land better than distant senators ever could. Then, without ceremony, Odenathus was assassinated. The reasons remain unclear. Court intrigue, family rivalries, and quiet resentments all appear in the sources, but none resolve into certainty. What matters is what followed. Zenobia became regent for her young son Vabilathus. At first, nothing seemed unusual. A woman ruling in the name of her child was not unheard of. Rome had seen this before, and often tolerated it, as long as taxes arrived and order remained. You would not yet see punishment or rebellion. Instead, you would see routine. Zenobia issued coins that still named the Roman emperor. She allowed Roman officials to remain. She kept the appearance of loyalty intact, because appearances were a form of currency. Meanwhile, she expanded control quietly. Palmyrene forces moved into Egypt, securing grain supplies. They pushed into parts of Asia Minor. Each move could be explained as protection, as temporary necessity, as assistance to Rome during a time of crisis. This period is often described as Zenobia building an empire, but it did not feel like that at the time. It felt like administration. Soldiers needed pay, cities needed protection. Grain had to move without interruption. Zenobia traveled with the army, rode on horseback, and wore armor according to later writers, though these details may have been exaggerated by those who found a warrior queen unsettling. What is more certain is that she worked long hours and expected the same from others. Rome, distracted by civil wars and short-lived emperors, responded slowly. Messages crossed long distances, and decisions made in Italy often arrived months too late to matter. For a time, Zenobia existed in the space between attention and neglect. That space was dangerous, but also full of opportunity. Eventually the illusion broke. Coins were minted that named Vabilathus as Augustus, a title that could not be explained away. Zenobia herself was named Augusta. This was no longer administrative convenience. It was a claim. In Rome, claims were noticed. The Emperor Aurelian was not a man who tolerated ambiguity. He believed the empire could be restored through discipline, speed, and overwhelming force. When he turned east, he moved quickly, defeating Palmyrene forces in a series of battles that did not receive poetic treatment from ancient historians. These were not glorious clashes but practical engagements. Supply lines were cut, garrisons surrendered, cities opened their gates when resistance seemed pointless. You can imagine the growing quiet inside Palmyra as news arrived. Not panic at first, but calculation. How long could the walls hold? Whether negotiations were still possible? Whether Rome might accept submission without humiliation? Zenobia attempted diplomacy even as she prepared for defense. Letters were sent, offers were made, Aurelian continued forward. When Palmyra finally fell, Zenobia did not die in battle. She did not throw herself from the walls. Instead, she fled east toward Persia, perhaps hoping to find allies or at least refuge. She was captured by Roman cavalry near the Euphrates. This detail matters, because Rome preferred captured rulers alive. Dead enemies could not be displayed. At this moment, punishment had not yet been decided. Rome often improvised. Zenobia was valuable not because she was dangerous anymore, but because she was symbolic. She represented defiance, competence, and the uncomfortable truth that Rome had nearly lost the East not to barbarians, but to a ruler who understood Roman systems well enough to use them. Captured queens were not treated uniformly. Some were executed quietly. Some disappeared into comfortable obscurity. Others were paraded through Rome in triumphs that were carefully staged lessons in power. Zenobia waited, unsure which path awaited her. The journey west was long, and with each mile her status shifted further from ruler to subject. As you sit with this moment, you are left with a simple, unresolved thought. How would Rome choose to make an example of a queen who had ruled too well for their comfort? And what did punishment truly mean in an empire that preferred control over bloodshed? You travel with Zenobia now, not as a ruler giving orders, but as a valuable prisoner whose future has not yet been written. The Roman cavalry escorting her westward does not hurry unnecessarily. Speed is no longer required. The war is over. What remains is administration, and Rome is always careful with administration. Zenobia is guarded, but not mistreated. This is not mercy, it is calculation. Captured royalty is an asset. Executing Zenobia immediately would satisfy anger, but waste opportunity. Alive, she can be studied, displayed, and turned into a warning. Rome understands symbols better than most civilizations ever have. A queen in chains speaks more clearly than a battlefield covered in bodies. Along the road, daily life continues in small ways that rarely enter historical accounts. Food must be prepared, guards must rotate shifts, local officials must be informed of the prisoner passing through their territory. Zenobia sleeps under watch, perhaps in tents, perhaps in commandeered houses. She is still addressed with a form of respect, though the words now carry no power. Respect in Rome is flexible. It can be offered without meaning. You can imagine her mind during these days. The long hours of travel leave room for memory and calculation. She knows Roman history. She knows what happened to defeated kings and queens before her. Some were strangled in prison. Some were exiled. Some were displayed in triumphs, forced to walk through the streets of Rome while the crowd shouted. Zenobia would have understood that survival did not mean safety. Aurelian does not rush to see her. This, too, is intentional. Roman emperors control access to themselves carefully. When they finally meet a defeated enemy, it is on Roman terms. Zenobia is eventually brought before him, and the meeting is described differently depending on the source. Some portray her as defiant, others as dignified, others as humbled. What likely occurred was more restrained. Roman politics favored restraint. Too much drama gave opponents material to twist. Zenobia is accused of rebellion. She responds, according to later writers, by blaming her advisors. This detail has often been interpreted as weakness or betrayal. It may have been neither. In Roman courts, survival often required redirecting blame. Advisors were expendable. Queens were rare. Zenobia may have been adapting quickly to a new reality where moral consistency mattered less than staying alive. While Zenobia waits, Palmyra itself rebels again. This second uprising seals its fate. Aurelian returns and destroys the city thoroughly. Temples are burned. Walls are pulled down. The population is killed or enslaved. This destruction is not aimed at Zenobia directly, but it reshapes her future. Palmyra no longer exists as a power that might need its queen restored or reconciled. With the city erased, Zenobia becomes unanchored. She is no longer a ruler without a throne. She is simply a prisoner. This is an important shift. Rome treats captive queens differently depending on what they still represent. A queen tied to a living people and city is dangerous. A queen whose world has been destroyed is manageable. Punishment can now be theatrical instead of strategic. The decision is made to bring Zenobia to Rome for Aurelian triumph. Triumphs are carefully choreographed events. They are not spontaneous celebrations, but planned narratives. Every captive, every object, every animal paraded through the streets is chosen to convey a message. Zenobia is part of this message. The journey to Rome is longer than the campaign that defeated her. Ships must be arranged, routes planned. Timing matters. Triumphs are scheduled when the political climate is favorable. Zenobia waits again, this time likely in Italy, possibly in a villa or guarded residence rather than a cell. Roman elites sometimes visited such prisoners out of curiosity. A defeated queen from the east would have been a novelty. Daily life for Zenobia in this period would have been quiet and repetitive. She would eat Roman food, hear Roman speech, and watch Roman customs. The rhythms of empire surround her now, slow and heavy. Rome does not rush. It absorbs. When the triumph finally occurs, it is overwhelming by design. The streets are lined with spectators. Incense fills the air, soldiers march in formation. Spoils of war are displayed. Captives are brought forward in sequence, each representing a conquered land or people. Zenobia appears adorned in jewelry and chains of gold. The chains are heavy enough to be symbolic, but not so heavy that she cannot walk. Rome wants her visible, upright, unmistakably present. Ancient writers dwell on this moment, because it unsettles them. A queen who once commanded armies now walks as part of a spectacle. Some emphasize her dignity, others emphasize her humiliation. What matters more is the Roman crowd. They see not an individual woman, but a lesson. This is what happens when you challenge Rome, even successfully, even intelligently. After the triumph, many captives are executed. This is the expected end. The crowd disperses. Rome moves on, but Zenobia does not die. Instead, something unusual happens. Aurelian spares her. The reasons are debated. Some suggest admiration. Others suggest practicality. Killing Zenobia gains Rome little now. Sparing her demonstrates Roman magnanimity. Mercy, when granted selectively, reinforces power just as effectively as violence. Zenobia is given a residence near Tibur, modern Tivoli. She receives an allowance. Her children are reportedly educated as Romans. She is allowed to live, but not to return east. This is a quiet punishment. She is removed from history without bloodshed. She becomes a curiosity, a former queen living as a noblewoman under watch. Her days now are defined by routines she does not control. Meals at set times. Limited movement. Conversations that never quite forget who she once was. She may host guests. She may read. She may walk gardens that are carefully maintained, far removed from the desert city she once ruled. Rome does not erase her entirely. It domesticates her. This form of punishment is often overlooked because it lacks drama. Yet it is deeply Roman. Death ends a story. Survival under supervision rewrites it. Zenobia lives on, but her narrative belongs to Rome now. For the empire, this outcome serves multiple purposes. It neutralizes a threat. It avoids creating a martyr. It allows Rome to present itself as civilized and merciful. For Zenobia, survival means adaptation. She must learn a new way of being, one where memory is both her possession and her burden. As you sit with this quieter phase of her life, another question emerges. Was survival in comfort a victory over Rome, or was it the final and most effective punishment Rome could impose on a queen who once ruled too freely? You find Zenobia, at the end of her story, not in chains, and not on a throne, but in a place designed to feel final without feeling cruel. The villa near Tibur is comfortable in a Roman way. Stone floors remain cool, even in summer. Water moves constantly through fountains and channels. Gardens are trimmed by hands that do not belong to the owner. Everything functions smoothly, which is precisely the point. Rome excels at turning former threats into managed lives. Zenobia is alive, well-fed, and housed among Roman elites, yet every aspect of her existence is contained. She does not rule. She does not command. She does not travel freely. The silence around her is deliberate. Rome is patient enough to let memory fade on its own. Ancient sources offer fragments of Zenobia life after her capture. Some say she married a Roman senator. Others claim she devoted herself to philosophy. A few suggest she lived quietly, respected for her intelligence, but carefully watched. These accounts differ because Zenobia no longer mattered politically. Once a figure loses relevance, historians stop paying close attention. This is one of the quieter punishments Rome imposes. It allows important people to become unimportant. You can imagine her days unfolding in a rhythm that is almost dull. Morning walks. Reading Greek texts she already knows by heart. Conversations that avoid certain topics. No councils, no petitions, no messengers arriving with urgent news. For a woman accustomed to decisions that affected thousands, this stillness may have felt heavier than chains. Her children, especially Verbalathus, vanish from the historical record. This absence is itself meaningful. Rome often absorbed the children of defeated rulers, educating them as Romans, stripping them of the context that gave their lineage power. If Zenobia's son survived into adulthood, he did so as a Roman citizen, not a Palmyrene king. This was not accidental. Rome did not just conquer territories, it reshaped futures. Zenobia's survival has sometimes been portrayed as mercy, but Roman mercy always served Roman interests. By sparing her, Rome avoided martyrdom. By housing her comfortably, Rome displayed confidence. A fragile empire kills its enemies. A secure empire keeps them alive and quiet. This approach to punishment reveals something essential about Roman power. Rome was less interested in revenge than in stability. Executions were tools, not habits. Public humiliation in triumphs was temporary. Long-term control required something subtler. It required teaching the world that resistance might not end in death, but it would end in irrelevance. Zenobia's transformation from queen to Roman noblewoman sends a message that extends beyond her own life. It tells other client rulers that Rome does not always destroy you. Sometimes it preserves you in a smaller shape. Your name survives, but emptied of authority. Your body lives on, but your story is rewritten by others. This method also exposes a tension within Roman culture. Romans admired strength, intelligence, and discipline. Zenobia embodied all three. Yet admiration did not translate into tolerance. A capable ruler outside Roman control was more threatening than a weak one. Zenobia's greatest offense was not rebellion. It was competence. As years pass, Zenobia becomes a figure of quiet contradiction. Roman writers describe her with respect. They praise her learning, her restraint, her dignity in defeat. At the same time, they ensure she remains safely removed from the narrative of Roman greatness. She appears as a footnote, a cautionary tale, a decorative example of Rome's ability to tame even the most impressive opposition. You can sense the loneliness in this kind of ending. Zenobia's world is gone. Palmyra is ruined. The desert city that once thrived on trade and negotiation has been reduced to stone and memory. She lives surrounded by Roman order, yet belongs fully to neither Rome nor Palmyra. This in-between state is not accidental. It is the final shape of her punishment. Yet, there is another way to look at her survival. Zenobia is not erased entirely. Her name endures. Later generations remember her not as a footnote, but as a ruler who challenged Rome and lived. In an empire where most challengers died violently, survival itself becomes a quiet form of resistance. Rome wanted Zenobia to fade. History refused to fully cooperate. Her story continues to attract attention precisely because it does not end where Roman narratives usually end. She does not die dramatically. She does not beg. She adapts. In doing so, she exposes a truth about empire. Control is never absolute. Memory escapes. As you reflect on Zenobia's life, you are left with a broader understanding of Roman punishment. It was not always loud. It did not always involve blood. Often, it involved time. Time spent waiting. Time spent adjusting. Time spent watching the world move on without you. Rome punished captured queens not only by breaking their power, but by forcing them to live with the knowledge of what they had lost. In Zenobia's case, that loss was not just a throne, but an entire way of being in the world. Her survival was real, but it came at the cost of everything that once defined her. This brings you to a final question, one that lingers beyond Palmyra and Rome. When history allows someone to live but denies them agency, is that an act of mercy, or is it simply a more patient form of conquest? You begin this story not on a battlefield, and not in a palace at its height, but in the quiet aftermath of collapse. Cleopatra Selene was born into a world already slipping away. Her mother, Cleopatra of Egypt, still ruled in name, and her father Mark Antony still commanded loyalty among many soldiers. But the balance had shifted. Rome was closing in, slowly and methodically, the way it always did when it decided a chapter of history was finished. Cleopatra Selene's childhood unfolded inside this narrowing space. Alexandria remained beautiful and busy, filled with libraries, harbors, rituals, and administrative routines that had not yet realized they were living on borrowed time. You can imagine her as a small child walking through corridors decorated with images of gods and ancestors, surrounded by servants who spoke softly and avoided difficult questions. Children of rulers often sensed danger long before they understood it. The adults around them became careful in ways that felt unnatural. Her name already carried weight. Selene was the moon goddess, a symbol of continuity and cycles. Cleopatra named her daughter deliberately, signaling legitimacy and divine connection. Yet names like crowns only matter when power supports them. Rome did not care what Egyptian queens named their children. The defeat of Antony and Cleopatra by Octavian did not arrive suddenly. It unfolded through rumors, shifting alliances, and cautious silence. Cleopatra's saloon would not have witnessed strategy meetings or troop movements, but she would have felt absence. Fewer visitors, longer waits for messages. Faces tightened by worry. When the final defeat came, it came with speed and certainty. After Antony's death and Cleopatra's suicide, Egypt did not resist. Rome entered Alexandria not as a conqueror burning a city, but as an administrator taking possession. This distinction matters. Rome wanted Egypt intact. Its grain fed the empire. Its wealth stabilized politics. Destruction would have been inefficient. Cleopatra Selene, still very young, was taken alive, along with her siblings. This was not kindness. Rome understood the value of royal children. They were symbols, bargaining tools, and future leverage. Killing them would have created martyrs. Raising them under Roman supervision created something more useful. The journey from Egypt to Rome was long and disorienting. You can imagine a child watching familiar landscapes disappear, and unfamiliar ones replace them. The sea, the ports, the languages, the clothing, all changed. No one explained the full meaning of what was happening. Explanations would have been complicated and unnecessary. Children adapted because they had to. In Rome, Cleopatra Selene entered a world that had already decided who she was. She was the daughter of defeated enemies. She was also proof of Roman victory. During Octavian triumph, she and her siblings were paraded through the streets. Ancient sources mention the children, though briefly. That brevity itself is revealing. They mattered less than the spectacle of conquest. Still, being displayed in this way marked them permanently. After the triumph, Cleopatra Selene's life shifted again. She did not go to prison. Instead, she was placed in the household of Octavia, the sister of Octavian, and the former wife of Mark Antony. This arrangement was deeply Roman. It combined mercy, control, and symbolism. Octavia represented Roman virtue. By raising Antony's children, she demonstrated moral superiority while ensuring they remained under watch. Life in Octavia's household was orderly and restrained. Cleopatra Selene received a Roman education. She learned Latin alongside Greek. She was taught literature, history, and the behavior expected of noble women. The routines were predictable, meals at fixed times, lessons conducted quietly, public appearances carefully managed. This was not imprisonment, but it was not freedom either. Cleopatra Selene could not choose her future. Every aspect of her upbringing served Roman interests. She was being shaped into something safe. You might expect resentment or rebellion, but childhood rarely allows such clarity. Cleopatra Selene grew up Romanized. Surrounded by children of senators and generals, Egypt became a memory rather than a lived reality. Her mother image survived through stories and portraits, filtered through Roman interpretation. Rome excelled at this kind of transformation. It did not erase conquered elites entirely. It absorbed them. Cleopatra Selene's identity was gradually redirected. She was no longer an Egyptian princess first. She was a Roman noblewoman of exotic origin. Yet traces of her past remained. Coins, genealogies, and names still mattered. Rome understood lineage, even as it controlled it. Cleopatra Selene carried the prestige of her parents, but stripped of political threat. This balance made her useful. As she grew older, attention turned to her marriage. Royal children raised in Rome often served diplomatic purposes later. Cleopatra Selene was married to Juba of Mauritania, himself a former captive raised under Roman supervision. Their union was not romantic. It was strategic. Two safe rulers, educated by Rome, placed over a client kingdom that required stability rather than independence. This marriage marked another quiet transition. Cleopatra Selene moved from captive child to client queen. She ruled, but only within boundaries Rome approved. Her kingdom existed because Rome allowed it to exist. Still, in Mauritania, Cleopatra Selene reintroduced elements of her heritage. Egyptian symbolism appeared on coins. Architectural styles blended cultures. This suggests a careful negotiation of identity rather than rebellion. She remembered where she came from, but understood where power truly lay. You find Cleopatra Selene no longer as a child being carried through ceremonies she does not understand, but as a young woman shaped by years of quiet Roman discipline. By now, Egypt is not a place she remembers through experience, it is a story told in fragments, a name repeated by tutors, a land described in poetry and history lessons written by Romans. Her mother image exists in contrast rather than intimacy. Cleopatra is remembered as brilliant but dangerous, charming but excessive, a warning more than a parent. Life in Octavia household continues with careful order. Octavia herself represents everything Rome wants to project: modesty, loyalty, emotional restraint. Cleopatra Selene grows up watching how Roman women of status move through space. They speak calmly, they manage households, they influence politics indirectly through family and marriage rather than public command. This is not weakness. It is a system refined over generations. You can imagine Cleopatra Selene learning when to speak and when silence is expected. She learns how to listen without reacting. She learns how to remember without revealing too much. These are survival skills in Rome, especially for someone whose lineage carries risk. Education is thorough. She reads Greek historians who praise Alexander and Roman historians who criticize Eastern excess. She studies rhetoric not to speak publicly, but to understand how arguments are constructed. She learns geography and administration, the slow machinery that keeps empires functioning. None of this is dramatic. It is repetition. It is routine. It is Rome shaping a mind. Cleopatra Selene grows alongside other children of the elite. They play, compete, and form bonds that will matter later. Rome's social networks are dense. Knowing the right people matters more than individual ambition. Cleopatra Selene becomes part of this web, though she is always slightly apart. Her origin makes her interesting, but also monitored. As adolescence approaches, her role becomes clearer. Rome does not raise royal captives without purpose. The empire prefers client kingdoms governed by rulers who owe their position to Roman favor. Cleopatra Selene is an ideal candidate. She has royal blood, but no independent base of power. She understands Roman expectations. She is educated to rule without challenging. The choice of her husband reflects this logic. Juba of Mauritania was once a child king taken captive after his father's defeat. Like Cleopatra Selene, he was raised in Rome, educated carefully, and molded into a ruler who would maintain order rather than seek glory. Their shared background is not coincidence. Rome pairs like with like. Their marriage is arranged with minimal ceremony compared to Roman aristocratic unions. There is no illusion of romance. Instead, there is purpose. Two former captives now become joint rulers of a client kingdom. Rome presents this as generosity. In reality, it is efficient governance. When Cleopatra Selene leaves Rome for Mauritania, she enters a new phase of her life. The journey westward is symbolic. She moves away from the center of empire but not beyond its reach. Mauritania exists within Roman systems of trade, taxation, and military oversight. Its kings rule at Rome pleasure. In Mauritania, Cleopatra Selene takes on visible authority. She appears on coins. She participates in court rituals. She supports building projects. Yet everything operates within defined boundaries. Roman advisors remain present. Military power ultimately rests with Rome. Cleopatra Selene authority is real, but conditional. You can sense the careful balance she maintains. She does not attempt to revive Egypt as a political force. That would be dangerous. Instead, she expresses identity through culture. Egyptian symbols appear alongside Roman imagery. Greek language remains prominent. This blending is not rebellion. It is memory negotiated into acceptable form. Daily life as a client queen is not glamorous. It involves reviewing petitions, overseeing grain distribution, and ensuring loyalty among local elites. Cleopatra Selene spends time managing marriages, land grants, and religious festivals. These tasks are repetitive and essential. They keep the kingdom stable, which is Rome's primary concern. Motherhood becomes another part of her life. Her children represent continuity, but also vulnerability. She understands what it means to be born royal under Roman oversight. She raises them with caution. They learn loyalty before ambition, survival before pride. Rome watches closely. As long as Mauritania remains quiet and productive, Cleopatra Selene is praised as a success story. She embodies Rome's preferred outcome for defeated dynasties: transformation without resistance, cooperation without independence. Yet beneath this stability lies an unresolved tension. Cleopatra Selene is both ruler and reminder. Her very presence evokes a past Rome worked hard to control. The name Cleopatra still carries echoes of defiance. Rome tolerates this because it has been neutralized. As years pass, Cleopatra Selene becomes adept at this constrained existence. She rules efficiently. She avoids provocation. She maintains cultural expression without political challenge. This is not submission in the emotional sense. It is adaptation refined into habit. You are left considering the cost of such adaptation. Cleopatra Selene lives, rules, and leaves a mark. Yet her life is never entirely her own. Every decision is shaped by the knowledge that Rome is always watching. This leads to a question that remains unresolved. Did Cleopatra Selene achieve a form of quiet autonomy within Roman limits? Or did Rome simply succeed in turning the legacy of its greatest enemy into another tool of imperial order? You arrive at the final phase of Cleopatra Selene life, not at a moment of crisis, but in a long stretch of managed stability. This is fitting. Her story is not one of sudden collapse or dramatic defiance. It is a story shaped by endurance, adaptation, and the quiet weight of Roman oversight that never fully lifts. As Queen of Mauritania, Cleopatra Selene settles into a rhythm that feels almost administrative. The kingdom lies along the North African coast, valuable to Rome for trade routes, agricultural output, and strategic positioning. Roman ships pass through its ports. Roman merchants move freely. Roman officials observe carefully, though discreetly. This is not occupation, but it is never independence. Cleopatra Selene and Juba rule together, and ancient sources suggest their partnership is functional and effective. They issue joint coinage, blending Roman symbols with Greek and Egyptian imagery. This is not careless decoration. Coins are statements, they circulate widely, and quietly communicate authority. Cleopatra Selene understands this well. She does not erase her heritage, but she frames it in ways that Rome finds acceptable. You can imagine her daily responsibilities unfolding with regularity: audiences with local elites, review of tax records, oversight of grain shipments, correspondence with Roman administrators, written in careful, respectful language. None of this resembles the theatrical rule of her mother. Cleopatra Selene power operates through consistency rather than spectacle. Her children grow up within this environment of cautious privilege. They are heirs, but heirs to a throne that exists only with Roman approval. Cleopatra Selene prepares them accordingly. Education emphasizes loyalty, cultural fluency, and restraint. She knows firsthand what happens when ambition outruns tolerance. At some point, Cleopatra Selene disappears from the historical record. There is no dramatic account of her death, no accusation, no punishment. She likely dies young, perhaps in her 30s, possibly due to illness. The absence of detail is itself meaningful. Rome had no reason to highlight her passing. She had done her job. The kingdom remained stable. No lesson needed to be taught. After her death, Mauritania continues under Juba, and later under their son. The system holds for a time. Eventually, Rome absorbs the kingdom fully, ending even the illusion of local monarchy. This outcome does not reflect failure on Cleopatra Selene's part. It reflects the long-term trajectory of Roman expansion. Client kingdoms are temporary solutions, not permanent arrangements. Looking back, Cleopatra Selene's life appears almost successful by Roman standards. She survives, she rules, she maintains cultural memory without provoking destruction. Compared to many children of defeated dynasties, her outcome is favorable. Yet, this assessment depends entirely on Roman definitions of success. Cleopatra Selene never chooses her path. She is taken as a child, raised under supervision, married for strategy, and placed on a throne designed to limit her freedom. Her competence ensures stability, but competence itself becomes a tool for empire. Rome rewards those who function well within its system, not those who challenge it. This is where her story connects back to Zenobia, and to the broader pattern of Roman punishment. Rome does not always crush its enemies immediately. Often, it reshapes them. It allows survival, comfort, and even honor, but only after stripping away unpredictability. Cleopatra Selene is not punished through suffering. She is punished through constraint. Yet, there is another perspective. Cleopatra Selene manages to preserve fragments of her identity across generations. Egyptian symbolism appears in Mauritanian art. Greek culture remains prominent. Her children carry a blended legacy. These small acts matter. They suggest that even within empire, memory can persist quietly. Rome controls borders, armies, and administration. It cannot fully control how people remember where they come from. Cleopatra Selene's life becomes an example of negotiated existence. She neither defies Rome nor dissolves entirely into it. She occupies a narrow space where survival and remembrance coexist. For modern listeners, her story challenges simple ideas about victory and defeat. Cleopatra Selene loses her kingdom before she can understand what it means, yet she gains a different kind of influence, one measured not in conquest but in continuity. She does not restore Egypt. She does not avenge her parents. Instead, she ensures that their legacy does not vanish completely. As you reflect on her life, you return to the central question of this series: how did Rome really punish captured queens? In Cleopatra Selene's case, punishment is subtle. It arrives disguised as opportunity. It offers safety instead of freedom, stability instead of choice. Her life invites a final thought that lingers quietly. When power allows you to live only within boundaries it defines, is survival itself a form of success, or simply the most refined expression of control? You begin this story not in a grand city of stone and marble, but in a landscape shaped by rain, mud, and slow movement. Northern Britain in the 1st century is not unified. It is a patchwork of tribes, alliances, rivalries, and seasonal rhythms. Power here does not rest in permanent capitals. It rests in people, in loyalty, and in the ability to distribute goods and protection when needed. Cartimandua rules the Brigantes, one of the largest tribal confederations in Britain. Her authority is real, but it does not look like Roman authority. She governs through negotiation, gift-giving, and ritual. Councils matter. Personal relationships matter, even more. Her rule depends not only on her status, but on her ability to manage competing interests among local elites. Unlike many rulers Rome encounters, Cartimandua does not resist conquest openly. When Roman forces arrive in Britain under Claudius, she chooses cooperation. This decision is often framed as betrayal by later writers, but in its own time it is pragmatic. Rome is powerful, disciplined, and relentless. Open resistance carries a high cost. Cooperation offers survival. You can imagine Cartimandua weighing this choice carefully. She has seen what happens to tribes that resist Rome directly. Villages burned, leaders killed or enslaved, populations displaced. By aligning with Rome, she hopes to preserve her people, her position, and some measure of autonomy. Rome allows client rulers to exist, at least temporarily, as long as order is maintained. Rome accepts Cartimandua loyalty. She becomes a client queen, ruling the Brigantes with Roman backing. This arrangement brings stability, but it also introduces tension. Her authority now rests partly on Roman support rather than purely on tribal consensus. This changes how others see her. Some accept it, others resent it. The most famous moment of her rule comes when Caratacus, a British leader who has resisted Rome fiercely, is defeated and flees north seeking refuge. Cartimandua captures him and hands him over to the Romans. This act secures her favor with Rome, but it fractures her standing among other Britons. To Rome she is loyal and effective. To many locals she is compromised. This is where the story becomes quietly uncomfortable. Cartimandua does not act out of cruelty. She acts out of calculation. By delivering Caratacus, she removes a threat to Roman stability and reinforces her own position. Yet this choice isolates her further from traditional sources of legitimacy. Daily life under her rule continues. Taxes are collected, disputes are settled, Roman goods circulate more widely. The presence of Rome becomes normalized. This is not dramatic conquest. It is gradual integration. For some, life improves. For others, resentment grows quietly. Cartimandua, personal life, also becomes political. She divorces her husband Venutius and marries his armor-bearer, a man of lower status. This decision shocks local elites. Marriage among rulers is not private. It signals alliances and continuity. By breaking with expectations, Cartimandua weakens her internal support. Venutius does not accept this quietly. He becomes a rallying figure for opposition, presenting himself as a defender of tradition against Roman interference and Cartimandua choices. Rome backs Cartimandua militarily, but this only deepens the divide. Each Roman soldier protecting her reinforces the perception that her authority no longer comes from her people. You can feel the tension building not through speeches or battles, but through everyday interactions. Councils become strained, loyalty becomes conditional, trust erodes slowly. Cartimandua remains queen, but the foundation beneath her is shifting. This is an important pattern in Roman punishment. Rome does not always remove rulers immediately. Sometimes it allows them to remain until their own position collapses. In doing so, Rome avoids direct blame. When Cartimandua falls, It will appear to be the result of local conflict rather than imperial decision. Eventually, Venutius rebels openly. The Brigantes split. Fighting breaks out. Roman forces intervene, not to restore Cartimandua authority permanently, but to extract her safely. She is removed from Britain and disappears from the historical record. Her punishment is not execution. It is displacement. She loses her people, her land, and her role. Like Zenobia and Cleopatra Selene, she survives, but survival comes stripped of context. Rome saves her life, but not her world. As you sit with this moment, you are left with an unresolved question. Did Cartimandua choose to cooperate with Rome protect her people as long as possible, or did it simply delay an outcome that would have come regardless, while costing her everything that once gave her power? You return to Cartimandua's story at the moment, when cooperation begins to feel heavier than resistance. On paper, her alliance with Rome still functions. Roman officers recognize her authority. Supplies move, messages arrive. Order is maintained in outward form. Yet beneath this structure, something essential is wearing thin. Power among the Brigantes has never been absolute. It depends on consent, reputation, and the constant balancing of interests. Cartimandua's authority once came from her ability to distribute resources, lead ritual obligations, and embody continuity. Now, more and more of her authority flows from Roman backing. This shift is subtle but deeply felt. You can imagine the daily strain. Each decision now carries two audiences. Rome expects efficiency and loyalty. The Brigantes expect tradition and protection from foreign dominance. These expectations increasingly conflict. When Cartimandua sides with Rome, she appears distant from her own people. When she hesitates, Rome grows impatient. Venutius understands this tension instinctively. His rebellion is not only military, it is social and symbolic. He presents himself as the defender of local autonomy. Even as he adopts Roman tactics when useful, he gathers those who feel marginalized by Cartimandua choices and by Rome's growing presence. The divide hardens. Roman support keeps Cartimandua on the throne, but it also isolates her. Garrisons stationed to protect her become reminders of dependence. Councils convene with fewer willing participants. Silence replaces open opposition, which is often more dangerous. Silence signals withdrawal. Cartimandua's personal decisions continue to echo politically. Her marriage remains a point of contention. In societies where lineage and alliance shape stability, personal relationships are never private. Each choice she makes is interpreted as a statement about legitimacy. Opposition leaders use these choices to question her right to rule. Rome observes all of this with pragmatic distance. Roman administrators do not intervene in local disputes unless stability is threatened. They prefer client rulers to manage their own problems. This approach minimizes Roman responsibility and cost. When instability grows, Rome steps in selectively. The first open conflict with Venutius is contained. Roman troops assist Cartimandua and restore temporary order. Yet this victory is shallow. Each intervention strengthens the perception that Cartimandua rule survives only through Roman force. The cycle repeats. Resistance grows, intervention follows. Legitimacy erodes further. You can sense the narrowing of options. Cartimandua cannot return to a purely independent rule. That path is closed. She cannot fully satisfy Roman expectations without alienating her people. That path leads to isolation. Her position becomes a narrow bridge that grows thinner with time. Eventually the balance breaks. Venutius launches a more decisive uprising. This time Roman forces are stretched thin elsewhere. Their response is slower. The conflict escalates beyond what Cartimandua authority can contain. The Brigantes' territory fractures. Rome makes a calculation. Protecting Cartimandua personally remains useful. Restoring her as ruler no longer does. Roman strategy shifts from preservation to extraction. Soldiers are sent not to suppress rebellion entirely, but to secure her removal. Cartimandua evacuation is quiet. There is no public trial, no dramatic execution. She is escorted out of her own land under guard. This moment marks the true end of her rule, not when she allied with Rome, not when she delivered Caratacus, but when Rome decides she is no longer worth the effort. Her disappearance from the historical record follows quickly. Roman writers move on. Britain remains unstable, but Rome adapts. Direct administration replaces client rule in the region. Cartimandua becomes a footnote, mentioned mainly as an example of a ruler who aligned with Rome and lost control anyway. This outcome reveals something important about Roman punishment. Rome does not always punish betrayal or failure directly. Sometimes it allows a ruler to fail slowly, publicly, and irreversibly. The lesson is not delivered through violence, but through outcome. Cartimandua survives, but survival is not restoration. She lives without her people, her authority, or her land. Rome saves her body and discards her role. This is efficient. It avoids martyrdom. It avoids rebellion sparked by execution. It also sends a clear message to other client rulers. Cooperation with Rome offers protection only as long as usefulness remains. Loyalty is transactional. When circumstances change, protection ends. As you consider Cartimandua's story at this stage, another unresolved question takes shape. Did Rome truly betray her by withdrawing support, or did Cartimandua simply reach the inevitable limit of compromise within an empire that never intended client queens to endure? You reach the end of Cartimandua's story, not with a clear ending, but with absence. This absence is deliberate, and it reflects how Rome preferred certain stories to conclude. Once Cartimandua is removed from Britain, she effectively stops existing in the Roman narrative. There are no detailed accounts of her final years, no reflections, no reassessments. Silence takes over. This silence is not accidental. Roman historians wrote with purpose. They recorded events that reinforced Roman authority and identity. A client queen who cooperated, lost legitimacy, and was quietly extracted no longer served a useful lesson once her removal was complete. Her story had already delivered its message. You can imagine Cartimandua's life after removal unfolding in a way that feels familiar by now. She is likely housed somewhere within Roman-controlled territory, perhaps in Gaul or Italy. She is given protection, possibly an allowance, and certainly supervision. Her movements are limited. Her contacts are monitored. She is safe, but irrelevant. The shift from ruler to dependent is profound. Cartimandua once mediated disputes, distributed wealth, and embodied continuity for her people. Now her days are shaped by routines she does not set. Meals arrive whether she is hungry or not. Time passes without petitions or councils. Decisions are made elsewhere. This is the final Roman punishment in its most refined form. Rome does not need to humiliate Cartimandua publicly. It does not need to kill her. It simply removes her from the context that gave her identity. She survives, but without function. Looking back, her cooperation with Rome appears neither foolish nor malicious. It is understandable. Resistance would likely have ended in immediate destruction. Cooperation extended her rule, and may have spared her people from earlier devastation. Yet the cost of cooperation accumulates slowly. Each compromise narrows future choices. Cartimandua's story reveals the fragility of client rule. Rome presents alliance as partnership, but it is never equal. Client rulers exist to serve Roman stability. When that stability is threatened, the client becomes expendable. Rome does not feel bound by loyalty in the way local societies might. Loyalty is useful only while it produces results. Her story also complicates simple judgments about collaboration. Cartimandua does not betray her people out of greed or fear alone. She navigates a world where Rome power is overwhelming and alternatives are limited. Her failure is not moral, it is structural. No individual ruler could permanently reconcile Roman expansion with local autonomy. For Rome, the lesson is clear and effective. Cooperation delays conquest. It does not prevent it. Client rulers are transitional tools, not permanent partners. For those who accept Roman protection, the price is eventual absorption or removal. Cartimandua becomes a warning, not because she resisted Rome, but because she trusted it. Her punishment lies not in violence, but in the erosion of legitimacy and the quiet loss of everything that once anchored her authority. As you sit with this ending, you may notice how closely it resembles the fates of Zenobia and Cleopatra Selene, despite their very different choices. All three survive. All three lose control over their own narratives. Rome allows them to live, but only within carefully managed limits. This pattern forces a final reflection. In an empire that values order above all else, is there any lasting space for independent power, or does every path eventually lead to the same quiet disappearance once usefulness ends? You begin this story after the noise has already passed. The fires are out. The roads are quiet again. Roman towns stand damaged or newly rebuilt. The name of Boudica still lingers, but only as an echo, already reshaped by Roman memory. What interests Rome now is not the rebellion itself, but what comes after. Rome is always more focused on aftermath than on emotion. Boudica uprising is often remembered for its violence. Entire settlements were destroyed, Roman civilians were killed, temples were burned. Yet rebellion is only the first half of the story. The second half is slower and more revealing. It shows how Rome dealt with defeat, survival, and silence once the battlefield cleared. You must imagine Britain immediately after the rebellion ends. The land is unsettled. Fields are damaged. Trade is disrupted. Communities that once supported Rome are frightened. Those that supported Boudica are terrified. Rome's response is not immediate slaughter. That would waste resources. Instead, Rome begins restoring order through paperwork, patrols, and punishment delivered unevenly. Boudica herself vanishes from the record almost as soon as she appears. Roman sources say she died, possibly by poison, possibly by illness. They do not linger. Her body is never displayed. There is no triumph, no parade. This absence is important. Rome does not need Boudica alive or visible. Her rebellion has already failed. What Rome needs now is stability. Punishment shifts away from the queen and onto her people. This is how Rome often works. Leaders disappear quietly. Communities absorb the cost. Land is confiscated. Hostages are taken. Tribal leadership structures are altered. Roman law replaces local systems slowly but firmly. You can imagine ordinary life resuming under pressure. Farmers return to fields that may no longer belong to them. Local leaders negotiate survival by cooperating. Roman officials arrive to assess damages and impose order. Roads are repaired first. Roads always come first. They allow control to move faster than resistance. For women associated with rebellion, the consequences are rarely recorded in detail, yet you can infer them from Roman practice. Noble women are taken into custody. Some are relocated. Some are married into loyal families. Some are kept under supervision as quiet reminders of what resistance costs. Rome does not document these outcomes carefully because they are not meant to be remembered. Boudica daughters disappear entirely. Roman writers mention their abuse before the rebellion, but say nothing afterward. This silence suggests something deliberate. Rome preferred not to give these figures a continued presence. Their survival or death matters less than their erasure. The Iceni tribe itself loses autonomy. Its lands are reorganized. Roman settlements expand. Veterans are settled. This is not revenge in a personal sense. It is administrative punishment. Rebellion marks a community as unstable. Unstable communities are restructured. You may notice how different this punishment feels compared to Zenobia or Cleopatra Selene. There is no careful preservation, no symbolic mercy. Boudica does not become a controlled survivor. She becomes a warning through absence. Rome chooses not to keep her story alive. This choice reflects how Rome categorizes enemies. Zenobia threatens imperial unity at a high level. Cleopatra Selene represents a defeated dynasty useful for display. Boudica represents chaos. Chaos is not preserved. It is buried. Yet the memory does not vanish entirely. Roman soldiers talk. Local communities remember. Fear lingers. Rome responds by increasing military presence. Forts are reinforced. Patrols become routine. Stability is enforced not through speeches but through repetition. Daily life under this new order becomes narrower. Fewer local rituals, more Roman law. Taxes collected more strictly. Disputes resolved by officials who do not know local customs. This is how punishment continues long after rebellion ends. It becomes part of everyday experience. You might expect Rome to soften after victory. Instead, it becomes more cautious. Boudica rebellion proves that Britain is volatile. Rome responds with surveillance rather than trust. Client rulers are replaced or constrained. Autonomy shrinks. In this environment, the story of Boudica is allowed to survive only in Roman framing. She is described as wild, excessive, and doomed. Her cause is not examined seriously. Her grievances are acknowledged only briefly. Rome reduces her to a lesson rather than a leader. This reduction serves a purpose. It reassures Roman readers that rebellion is irrational and temporary. It discourages sympathy. It simplifies a complex event into a moral conclusion Rome can control. As you sit with this quieter phase of the story, another question begins to form. If Rome chose not to punish Boudica publicly, and instead punished her people through restructuring and silence, what does that reveal about how empire prefers to erase threats once force has already spoken? You re-enter Boudica's story, not amid flames or battle cries, but in the quiet aftermath, where punishment becomes invisible yet pervasive. Rome has suppressed the uprising, but its work is far from over. Victory on the battlefield is immediate. Victory over memory and local structures takes patience, administration, and subtlety. For the Romans, it is not enough to kill or exile a leader. They must ensure that rebellion cannot regenerate in ordinary life. The Iceni territory is surveyed carefully. Land redistribution follows strict Roman patterns. Estates are parceled out to veterans, often ignoring local claims or customs. This serves a dual purpose. It rewards soldiers who served faithfully, and it fragments the social cohesion that made rebellion possible in the first place. Villagers who once looked to Boudica and her family for leadership now find their loyalties disrupted by Roman administration. The subtlety of this punishment is profound. It does not require bloodshed beyond what already occurred. It requires disorientation, a quiet reshaping of everyday life. Local elites who survived the revolt are co-opted or marginalized. Some are brought to Roman settlements for education, marriage, or supervised roles. Others are kept under observation. Councils continue to meet, but their decisions are filtered through the lens of Roman priorities. Rome punishes rebellion by replacing trust with surveillance, autonomy with oversight. Every routine becomes a reminder of the consequences of defiance. Women of the Iceni, particularly those associated with Boudica's family, face unique consequences. Roman records seldom mention them, but their experience can be inferred. Noble women may be relocated to Roman households, educated in Roman norms, or married strategically to loyal families. This is not vengeance as much as preventive control. By reshaping familial lines, Rome ensures that influence passes only to compliant descendants. It is slow, quiet, and efficient. The economy itself is a tool of punishment. Taxes are strictly enforced, with fines and penalties imposed on those suspected of complicity. Trade routes are reorganized to favor Roman merchants, diminishing the autonomy of local markets. Supplies and grain once controlled by tribal networks are diverted through Roman channels. These shifts may appear mundane, but they transform daily life. Survival now depends on Roman systems rather than traditional structures. This is Rome's subtlety in action. Rebellion defeated not through violence alone but through administration and dependency. Boudica's disappearance from records allows Rome to control her story completely. Survivors talk, but their voices are scattered and filtered through fear. Children grow up with stories of defeat, knowing that rebellion invites consequences. Oral memory preserves some traces of her courage, yet the dominant narrative portrays her as excessive and doomed. In this way, punishment is both real and symbolic. By erasing her presence, Rome communicates that resistance is fleeting, while the empire endures. The military presence that follows is constant but measured. Forts are reinforced. Patrols move regularly, yet rarely provoke confrontation. Rome does not need dramatic shows of power. Subtle, persistent surveillance suffices. It is this ongoing, quiet pressure that keeps former rebels compliant. Punishment has evolved from a public spectacle to a form of daily governance, embedded in the rhythms of work, trade, and ritual. As the region stabilizes, new client leaders emerge under Roman oversight. They are chosen for compliance, not charisma. Their authority is limited, and they are reminded constantly that true power lies with Rome. Boudica's legacy, once a rallying symbol, is now a cautionary tale whispered at councils, serving as an indirect tool of control rather than an inspiration. Punishment extends far beyond the battlefield, stretching into culture, memory, and daily interaction. Even ordinary life bears the mark of punishment. Families reorganize around Roman-imposed structures. Festivals are permitted but monitored. Decisions that once were local now require approval from officials loyal to Rome. This is not an overtly violent regime. It is a system designed to condition obedience. Every action from paying taxes to participating in trade reinforces Rome authority. Resistance becomes impractical without constant coordination and courage, both of which are slowly sapped. Boudica herself remains absent, yet her influence persists as a spectre. Her choices, her rebellion, her absence, these shape how communities respond to Rome. Some comply quietly, others harbor resentment in ways difficult to detect. Rome prefers this ambiguity. Visible punishment is temporary. Structural punishment is enduring. The empire does not need to maintain a constant narrative of fear. Its systems ensure compliance even when memory fades. You notice too that this form of punishment relies on time. Years pass, generations grow, and each acts within constraints set by an empire that survived chaos. Punishment is effective because it embeds itself in routine, not in headlines. Life continues, but the power to act independently has been eroded quietly and methodically. As you sit with this part of Boudica's story, a question begins to emerge. When an empire suppresses rebellion through administration, surveillance, and subtle restructuring rather than direct brutality, is the punishment less cruel, or is it simply more complete, because it shapes life invisibly and indefinitely? You arrive at the final act of Boudica's story, not in a blaze of battle, but in the muted continuation of life under empire. By now, years have passed. The immediate shock of rebellion has faded, towns rebuilt, trade routes reopened. The Asini and surrounding tribes move through daily routines that once would have been unthinkable under foreign control. Yet beneath this calm lies the enduring imprint of punishment. Boudica herself is absent. Rome ensures that she cannot re-emerge as a threat. Her fate remains uncertain. Reports suggest suicide, illness, or quiet removal. But it is the ambiguity that matters. By allowing her story to vanish into silence, Rome maintains control over memory. The empire does not need to execute her publicly. Absence alone reshapes the narrative. The people of Britain continue under layers of imposed structure. New client leaders, chosen for compliance, administer daily affairs, enforce taxes, and maintain peace. Rituals continue, but they are filtered through Roman oversight. Temples are repaired or repurposed. Grain collection and redistribution now follow Roman protocols. The economy functions, yet autonomy has been curtailed. Everyday life becomes the instrument of punishment. Ordinary families adjust gradually. Fields once managed collectively may now fall under Roman oversight or redistributed ownership. Trade networks shift to favor Roman merchants. Education and public messaging emphasize loyalty, subtly embedding the lessons of the rebellion into successive generations. Rome punishes not with dramatic spectacle, but through quiet control of the rhythms that sustain life. You may notice how this compares with the fates of Zenobia, Cleopatra Selene, and Cartimandua. Boudica receives no careful accommodation, no preservation of status, no ceremonial acknowledgement. Her punishment is erasure, her survival irrelevant. While other queens were incorporated into the empire's narrative and kept alive to serve as symbols, Boudica's influence is minimized. She becomes a cautionary absence rather than a living example. Yet this absence also ensures a different kind of legacy. Fear and respect intertwine in collective memory. Even in stories whispered privately among locals, Boudica's courage survives, framed as dangerous defiance that must not be repeated. Rome's choice to leave her memory ambiguous amplifies her impact precisely because it is incomplete, leaving room for imagination, oral history, and legend. This final phase of Boudica's story illustrates the spectrum of Roman punishment. Some are constrained, controlled, and preserved. Others are removed, erased, and replaced. Survival alone is not the goal. Shaping memory, authority, and daily life is. Punishment continues long after battle ends, quietly embedded in routines, relationships, and governance. The empire measures effectiveness not in immediate spectacle, but in enduring compliance. You are left with a lingering reflection. Boudica's rebellion was spectacular, her loss subtle, and her punishment prolonged in invisible ways. Rome does not always rely on death or chains to punish. Sometimes it achieves the same effect through the slow, relentless shaping of life itself. Resistance is remembered, but only on Rome's terms, and compliance becomes the measure of order. And finally, you are forced to confront the uncomfortable thought that resonates through the stories of Zenobia, Cleopatra Selene, Cartimandua, and now Boudica. Across time and geography, the empire's most sophisticated punishment is often not immediate, dramatic, or public, but slow, invisible, and enduring. Survival under empire may feel like mercy, but it is always conditional, always constrained, and always reshaped by power. You begin this story not in the marble halls of Rome, nor in the echoing chambers of the Senate, but in the quiet spaces where influence is measured in whispers and gestures. Agrippina the Younger enters history not as a soldier or a conqueror, but as a woman navigating the treacherous currents of imperial power. Her life unfolds amid a world where survival, authority, and reputation are constantly under threat. Born into the Julio-Claudian dynasty, Agrippina inherited both privilege and peril. Her father, Germanicus, was celebrated for his military success and his popularity with the legions. Her mother, Agrippina the Elder, embodied dignity, virtue, and defiance. From an early age, Agrippina the Younger observed the precarious balance between prominence and vulnerability. Her family's fortunes could rise or fall, with startling speed. Every action, every word, every alliance carried consequences beyond the immediate. Agrippina's youth was shaped by these lessons. She learned to read intentions behind smiles and gestures. She observed how Roman society measured women, not by deeds alone, but by the men around them and the political capital they could wield indirectly. A marriage could be a ladder, or a trap. A public appearance could strengthen a claim, or destroy it. Survival demanded patience, subtlety and foresight. Her first marriage, to Gnaeus Domitius Ahenobarbus, positioned her within a powerful but potentially vulnerable branch of the imperial family. The union combined status with opportunity, yet it was also fraught with tension. Roman aristocratic marriages rarely centered on affection. They were strategic arrangements designed to consolidate power, influence and lineage. For Agrippina, every domestic decision, every social interaction became a rehearsal for understanding the broader game of empire. By the time she was widowed, Agrippina had already witnessed enough political instability to understand that survival required proactive strategy. Her next move would determine not just her own life, but the trajectory of the Julio-Claudian line. She remarried, aligning herself with Emperor Claudius. This marriage elevated her to unprecedented authority for a woman in Rome. She became a central figure in imperial administration, influencing appointments, policy decisions, and the shaping of her son Nero's future. But this ascent was fraught with peril. The Palace of Rome, while magnificent, was a place where missteps were lethal. Allies could vanish overnight. Friends could become enemies. Public favor was fleeting, and rumors could spread faster than reasoned counsel. Agrippina had to operate within these narrow corridors, exercising influence subtly, strategically, and sometimes ruthlessly. Survival depended on understanding which battles to fight, which to avoid, and which to manipulate from behind the scenes. Her methods were both admired and vilified. Ancient writers paint her as ambitious, calculating, even dangerous. Modern historians recognize her intelligence, strategic acumen, and political skill. Yet even in praise there is caution. Agrippina's power is always depicted as exceptional, precisely because it is rare for a woman in her position. Her ability to navigate court intrigues, survive assassinations, and position her son for the throne exemplifies both personal talent and the extraordinary stakes of her environment. Daily life in the imperial household was itself a subtle form of influence. Meals, ceremonies, and interactions with senators, freedmen, and guards all provided opportunities to reinforce alliances or signal intentions. Agrippina understood the language of presence. To speak or remain silent could alter the balance of power. A casual remark could be remembered, recorded, and acted upon. Authority in Rome was performative as much as it was legal. Yet her story is not solely one of triumph. Power carries costs, and every maneuver carries risk. Enemies multiplied as her influence grew. Court factions emerged with opposing interests. Suspicion and paranoia were constant companions. Rome rewarded skill, but it also punished audacity. For Agrippina, the stakes were personal as well as political. Her son's succession, her family's security, and her own survival depended on every move being measured, deliberate, and sometimes merciless. Agrippina's life illustrates a critical tension in imperial Rome. Influence without official power is both potent and perilous. Women like her operated in spaces where rules were unwritten, yet consequences were immediate. Success could yield unparalleled authority. Failure could bring sudden death, exile, or disgrace. The line between cunning and treachery was thin and constantly shifting. Even her reputation, both in her time and in historical memory, reflects this tension. Roman historians framed her actions with moral judgment, emphasizing ambition as danger. Yet stripping away bias reveals a woman who mastered the subtle instruments of power available to her. She survived in a system designed to eliminate unpredictability. She navigated poison, not only literal threats, but metaphorical ones in alliances, rivalries, and reputation. By the end of this section, Agrippina appears as both resilient and precarious. She wields influence, secures her son's future, and survives intrigues that would destroy lesser figures. Yet the pressures surrounding her life are relentless, and the ultimate cost of survival remains uncertain. Rome rewards skill, but it never forgives audacity that exceeds its bounds. As you reflect on her story, one lingering question remains. In a world where influence is invisible yet deadly, is survival the ultimate triumph, or merely the prelude to a more carefully orchestrated downfall? You return to Agrippina, the Younger story, at a moment when influence and danger are inseparable. Having secured her position alongside Emperor Claudius, and positioned her son Nero for succession, Agrippina now navigates the intricate, often invisible politics of the Roman court. Her world is defined less by armies and more by whispers, letters and gestures, whose meanings can shift with interpretation. Survival is not guaranteed by rank alone, it requires constant attention, adaptability, and a precise understanding of human behavior. Life within the imperial palace is deceptively structured. Every action, from attending banquets to presenting gifts, carries multiple layers of significance. Agrippina observes how senators, freedmen, guards, and advisors respond to her presence. She notes subtle shifts in expression, tone, and posture. In this environment, even a glance can be a weapon or a warning. Reading these cues is crucial. Misunderstanding them can be fatal. Her influence over Claudius is methodical and deliberate. She does not confront him with demands, but cultivates alliances within his household and court. She ensures that key positions of power are held by men loyal either to her or to her vision for Nero's succession. These appointments are both strategic and symbolic, signaling stability while consolidating her control behind the scenes. Rome may appear hierarchical and rigid, but much of real authority rests in these invisible networks. At the same time, Agrippina must contend with enemies whose ambitions threaten her carefully constructed plans. Court factions arise quickly, often motivated by personal gain or resentment of her prominence. Rivalries are not always open. More often, they manifest as subtle obstruction, insinuation, or manipulation of Claudius himself. Agrippina counters these threats by blending persuasion, flattery, and calculated intimidation. She rarely acts impulsively. Patience and timing are her most effective tools. Her son Nero's upbringing is central to her strategy. She educates him in the Roman elite's values, while subtly emphasizing qualities that align with her goals. Knowledge, decorum, and loyalty are instilled alongside awareness of political realities. Agrippina understands that a future emperor must navigate the same deadly subtleties she does, and that his survival and by extension her legacy depends on mastering these skills early. Despite her skill, the danger is constant. Roman politics are inherently unstable, and the emperor himself can be unpredictable. Claudius' favor can shift unexpectedly, and new threats emerge with each appointment, marriage, or provincial policy. Agrippina's daily life involves constant calculation, which arguments to advance, which rivalries to provoke, and which appearances to cultivate. Survival is a balance of restraint and assertion, a continuous negotiation between visibility and control. You may notice that Agrippina's methods resemble a form of preemptive punishment. By acting decisively against potential rivals, she prevents the emergence of challenges before they can fully form. Alliances are formed and broken, positions secured, and threats neutralized without dramatic conflict. Poison, both literal and figurative, becomes a metaphor for the subtle, persistent way in which influence and retribution can shape outcomes in Rome. Yet, even as she consolidates power, Agrippina is aware that her position is precarious. Authority for a woman in Rome is never entirely secure. Legitimacy is tied not only to her marriage and lineage, but also to perception. Excessive ambition invites scrutiny. Overreach threatens survival. Each step toward securing Nero's future carries inherent risk, and every action has consequences that ripple through the court and beyond. Agrippina's story in this phase reveals the duality of Roman punishment and reward. Rome allows her unprecedented influence because it serves the broader imperial system. But this influence is conditional, constantly monitored, and fraught with hidden dangers. Survival is not a simple triumph. It is a careful, ongoing negotiation with a system that rewards skill while remaining indifferent to personal loyalty. By the end of this section, Agrippina emerges as both formidable and vulnerable. She has mastered the delicate art of court politics, secured her son's position, and extended her influence into the machinery of empire. Yet the ever-present dangers of envy, misjudgment, and imperial caprice suggest that her position, no matter how well calculated, is never entirely secure. This brings forward a critical question. When survival depends on constant calculation, strategic alliances, and the subtle elimination of threats, is power a form of security, or merely a temporary reprieve before inevitable peril? You reach the climax of Agrippina the Younger story in a world where survival and influence finally collide with the inherent dangers of ambition. By now, her orchestration of Nero's future is largely complete. He is groomed, positioned, and recognized as the legitimate heir. Yet her power, though immense, is never secure. Rome rewards skill, but it also tests it relentlessly. Authority is fluid, and what protects you today may imperil you tomorrow. Agrippina's life at this stage is a constant negotiation between visibility and control. She wields influence through appointments, ceremonies, and private counsel. Senators and officials often act in ways shaped by her foresight, yet she cannot fully eliminate risk. Imperial favor is fickle. Personal alliances shift. Public perception can pivot on rumor or suggestion. Every triumph carries the seed of potential disaster. Her enemies, many previously marginalized or manipulated, sense vulnerability. Some plot openly, others quietly undermine her initiatives. Claudius himself, once an ally and partner in securing Nero's succession, grows wary. The emperor's trust is not guaranteed, and every action Agrippina takes is observed with scrutiny. In Rome, the line between authority and threat is invisible, yet rigidly enforced. Agrippina's response is both strategic and ruthless. She neutralizes threats before they can grow, often using methods that are precise rather than overtly violent. Marriages, promotions, and dismissals serve as instruments of influence. Persuasion is blended with pressure. Alliances are maintained not through sentiment, but through constant, deliberate calculation. She operates in a space where subtlety and decisiveness are inseparable. Yet even her careful maneuvers cannot fully insulate her from the hazards of imperial politics. The very qualities that allowed her survival, intelligence, ambition, and control over her son's succession, also attract suspicion and resentment. Rome tolerates capable women in power only to a point. Exceed that threshold, and the mechanisms of elimination, covert or direct, begin to engage. The tension reaches its fatal culmination when her relationship with Nero, the son she has so carefully prepared, becomes complicated by his own emerging authority and desires. Historical accounts suggest that Agrippina overstepped perceived boundaries, seeking influence that Nero and his advisors resisted. The methods she had used to survive and dominate the court could not protect her from the combination of familial betrayal and political calculation. Survival, it turns out, is contingent not only on skill, but also on timing, circumstance, and the limits imposed by others' perception of power. Her death is dramatic in historical memory, but executed with precision. Agrippina is removed quietly, though the method, poison, shipboard schemes reflects Rome's enduring preference for controlled elimination over public spectacle when politically expedient. She dies, yet her life leaves an indelible mark. The empire demonstrates that even those who master influence and strategy remain vulnerable to the structures they navigate so expertly. Agrippina's story illustrates the intersection of power, gender, and Roman political pragmatism. Authority, while real, is conditional. Survival is not guaranteed by competence alone. Influence can be a double-edged sword. The very actions that ensure longevity may also provoke the mechanisms of downfall. Rome punishes subtly and decisively, shaping outcomes through both opportunity and constraint. Looking back, Agrippina's life resonates with patterns seen in the stories of Zenobia, Cleopatra Selene, Cartimandua, and Boudica. Each faced the tension between autonomy and empire. Each navigated power in a context dominated by external oversight. Each experienced the limits of survival within systems that valued utility over loyalty, strategy over sentiment, and order over individual ambition. Her story leaves a thought that lingers: mastery of influence can secure temporary triumph, but in a system defined by observation, calculation, and conditional favor, is survival ever truly victory, or merely the pause before the inevitability of empire asserts itself? You begin Theodora's story, not in the gilded halls of Constantinople, but in the crowded, noisy streets of the city's theatre district. Here, amid the smells of food stalls, the shouts of vendors, and the laughter of audiences, a young woman begins a journey that will carry her from obscurity to unparalleled influence. Theodora's life starts far from imperial courts, and it is shaped by survival, ambition, and the complexities of social mobility in Byzantine society. Born around the turn of the 6th century, Theodora enters a world rigidly structured by class and opportunity, yet rife with subtle avenues for advancement. Her family is not wealthy, and her father, according to contemporary sources, dies when she is young. Poverty shapes her early experiences, as do the social hierarchies that define acceptable occupations and behavior for women. From an early age, she is aware that survival depends on wit, charm, and the careful navigation of societal expectation. The theatre offers her both livelihood and education. As an actress and performer, Theodora learns to read audiences, anticipate reactions, and adapt swiftly. She gains skills in communication, persuasion, and improvisation, skills that will later prove invaluable in politics. The stage teaches her not only performance but negotiation, as she navigates patrons, rivals, and shifting public sentiment. Every role becomes a lesson in power, influence, and the subtleties of perception. Her life during this period is marked by both exposure and vulnerability. Women in her position face social stigma, economic instability, and the constant threat of exploitation. Yet, Theodora develops resilience, understanding that the public eye can be both a danger and a tool. She cultivates relationships with powerful men, some for protection, others for opportunity. Each interaction is calculated. Each choice can open a door or close one permanently. By her early 20s, Theodora has already begun to expand her ambitions beyond the theatre. Her intelligence, charisma, and growing network of connections attract attention from individuals within the imperial administration. She navigates these opportunities carefully, aware that misstep could destroy her prospects. In Constantinople, reputation is fragile, and ascent often depends as much on perception as on ability. Her meeting with Justinian marks a turning point. Justinian, ambitious but reliant on advisors and alliances, recognizes her talents and potential for political partnership. Their union, initially unconventional by class standards, becomes a foundation for mutual advantage. Theodora does not simply become consort, she becomes active participant in governance, wielding influence that few women in Byzantine history have attained. This ascent is not guaranteed by marriage alone. It requires skill, strategy, and the ability to translate personal charisma into political authority. Daily life in the palace contrasts sharply with her earlier experiences. Ceremonies, court audiences, and administrative meetings replace the theatre stage, yet the principles remain similar. Observation, timing, and psychological acuity continue to guide her actions. Theodora navigates court factions, imperial officials, and external threats with the same attention to human behavior she once applied to audiences. Survival and influence remain inseparable. Her position is unprecedented, yet precarious. Theodora operates in a society that values hierarchy, tradition, and public perception. While she holds authority, it is constantly evaluated, contested, and scrutinized. Every decision carries weight, and miscalculation could result not only in personal danger, but also in political instability. Authority in Byzantium is as much about perception as decree, and Theodora masters the subtle art of shaping both. Even in this early phase of her rise, the tension between power and survival is evident. The Theodora must maintain loyalty from her supporters, while neutralizing rivals. She must appear benevolent yet decisive, visible yet strategically restrained. Her story demonstrates that influence in Byzantium is never absolute. It is conditional, mediated through relationships, perception, and strategic action. As you reflect on this beginning, you notice the threads that link Theodora to other historical women in this series. Survival depends not only on boldness, but also on the ability to read social structures, anticipate responses, and act strategically. Opportunity and danger exist in the same space, and mastery of one often requires careful negotiation with the other. By the end of this section, Theodora has transformed from a young performer navigating the streets and stages of Constantinople to a figure poised for influence in the highest circles of power. Yet the dangers remain, and her journey illustrates that in a world defined by hierarchy, politics, and perception, ascent is inseparable from risk, and survival is a constant negotiation with circumstance and human ambition. A lingering question arises as you consider her story. When a woman ascends in a system designed to constrain her, is her power real, or is it simply the empresses' way of channeling her energy into controlled influence? You return to Theodora's story as her influence deepens and the stakes of imperial life become increasingly complex. No longer just a performer or consort, she now engages with governance, strategy, and diplomacy in a way that demands constant vigilance. Every decision she makes resonates beyond her immediate circle, affecting the empire's stability and the lives of thousands of citizens. Theodora quickly learns that survival in the Byzantine court requires mastering subtle forms of power. Unlike battlefield leaders or Roman client queens, her authority is exercised through persuasion, alliances, and the shaping of public perception. Factions form and dissolve around her. Advisors, generals, and courtiers all vie for her attention, each with motives that can shift overnight. Misreading a single expression, ignoring a rumor, or misjudging loyalty can result in political disaster. Daily life in the palace is a careful balancing act. Public appearances must demonstrate dignity and control, while private negotiations handle the nuanced conflicts that define governance. Theodora uses ritual, protocol, and strategic patronage to consolidate influence. She rewards loyalty and subtly punishes dissent, often without overt displays of force. Her methods echo those of other influential women in history. Subtle, continuous, and deeply calculated. Her role in policy extends into areas rarely recorded in traditional histories. She advises on appointments, legal matters, and charitable initiatives, shaping decisions that impact the empire's administration. For example, her interventions in social welfare programs not only enhance her public image, but also solidify alliances among key constituencies. Power is exercised not only through decree, but through the careful management of perception and loyalty. Yet the environment remains treacherous. Male courtiers, emperors in training, and military leaders all pose potential threats. Ambition is constant, and alliances are fragile. Theodora's intelligence and adaptability allow her to survive, but she cannot ignore the ever-present danger of betrayal. Each step toward consolidating influence carries risk. Each display of authority must be calibrated to avoid provoking resentment or fear. Her marriage to Justinian provides both protection and limitation. While she gains formal authority and unprecedented access to the levers of power, she must also navigate the emperor's expectations and the complex interplay of court politics. Their partnership is symbiotic but fraught. She amplifies his vision while remaining aware of the boundaries imposed by his ultimate authority. Theodora's survival depends on balancing her influence with restraint, knowing when to act boldly and when to operate quietly. Theodora's life also reflects the gendered realities of power. Her authority is exceptional, but constantly scrutinized. Whereas male advisors might be judged on competence alone, her actions are measured against expectations of morality, femininity, and loyalty. Misstep risks not only her political position, but her social legitimacy. She must be clever enough to wield influence while appearing to respect the norms of her society, a task that requires constant attention and psychological acumen. Her story during this phase illustrates the subtlety of imperial punishment and reward. Authority is granted but conditional. Influence is possible, but only within frameworks the system tolerates. The Theodora demonstrates that skill, intelligence, and perception can create extraordinary space for power, yet those same qualities attract scrutiny and potential downfall. Survival is not merely about avoiding enemies, it is about shaping the structures that determine which actions are permissible and which will provoke retaliation. By the end of this section, Theodora is firmly established as an influential figure within Byzantium. Her strategic acumen allows her to maneuver through threats, shape policy, and secure her position. Yet the empire's structures and the inherent dangers of court life ensure that her authority, while formidable, remains precarious. Her survival is a testament to her intelligence, but also to the constant tension between opportunity and constraint in a system designed to test every move. This leads to a crucial unresolved thought. When a woman attains unprecedented influence in a rigidly hierarchical empire, is her power a triumph of strategy, or is it simply the temporary exploitation of gaps within a system that ultimately seeks to limit her autonomy? You arrive at the final stage of Theodora's story, where influence, strategy, and survival converge into the lasting impact of her life. By this point, she is no longer merely the former actress from Constantinople's streets. She is empress, advisor, and a central force in the Byzantine court. Yet her power is never absolute. It is defined and constrained by the structures she has mastered, the perceptions she has shaped, and the alliances she has cultivated. Theodora's influence manifests in multiple arenas. She intervenes decisively in legal and social policy, advocating for widows, orphans, and marginalized populations. Her reforms are both practical and symbolic, enhancing her authority while stabilizing the empire. These actions demonstrate that power in Byzantium is not simply about commanding armies or issuing decrees. It is about shaping institutions, controlling narratives, and ensuring loyalty through both policy and example. Her relationships with court officials and Justinian themselves reflect a constant negotiation between cooperation and dominance. She wields influence subtly, guiding appointments, advising on military strategy, and shaping ceremonial practices. Every decision reinforces her position, while carefully avoiding open confrontation with the emperor or alienation of key supporters. Her skill lies in acting decisively, while maintaining the appearance of legitimacy and restraint. Yet the precariousness of her position is ever present. Even as empress, she faces threats from jealous courtiers, ambitious generals, and societal expectation. A misjudged alliance or a poorly timed intervention could destabilize her authority. Survival is not guaranteed by her title. It is maintained through relentless observation, judgment, and subtle management of human behavior. The Theodora story illustrates how empires employ both overt and invisible forms of control. While she exerts power and influence, her authority remains bounded by imperial structures, gender norms, and political perception. Her achievements demonstrate that exceptional skill can carve unprecedented space for influence, but also that this space is conditional, fragile, and constantly tested by the forces around her. Her legacy is remarkable. Theodora's reforms, interventions, and political acumen leave a lasting imprint on Byzantine governance and society. She demonstrates that survival in an empire is not merely about obedience or cunning, it is about mastering systems, understanding perception, and exerting influence in ways both visible and hidden. She transforms from performer to empress, but the lessons of her life highlight that power, while potent, is inseparable from risk and responsibility. Looking across her life, you notice parallels with previous women in this historical series. Cartimandua, Boudica, Agrippina, Zenobia, and Cleopatra Selene. Each navigated environments dominated by male authority, shifting loyalties, and conditional survival. Each exercised influence, endured threats, and faced the limits imposed by larger systems. Theodora's story emphasizes that influence can be as effective as physical power, but it always operates within boundaries that can shift without warning. Finally, her story leaves you with a lingering reflection. In a world where power is subtle, conditional, and constantly challenged, is survival the ultimate triumph? Or is it merely the delicate maintenance of influence within the invisible chains imposed by an empire? You begin the story of Hatshepsut, not in the grand halls of the mortuary temples of Der el-Bahari, nor in the resounding echoes of the Nile, but in the quieter spaces of her childhood and early court life. Born into the 18th dynasty of Egypt, she was destined for privilege yet faced circumstances that would challenge her authority in ways few rulers ever do. Her story is not simply one of succession, but of the subtle, persistent negotiation between expectation, identity, and the structures of power. Hatshepsut came into a world governed by both ritual and hierarchy. Pharaohs were more than kings. They were divine intermediaries, embodiments of gods on earth. Authority was intertwined with theology, ceremony, and the complex administration of a sprawling empire. From an early age, she observed the interplay of power, protocol, and human behavior. Survival, she quickly learned, required understanding not only who had influence, but how influence manifested in subtle gestures, speeches, and alliances. Her father, Thutmose I, and later, her stepbrother Thutmose II, set precedents that defined the expectations of the royal household. Within these structures, women could wield power, but only indirectly or through carefully managed relationships. Hatshepsut's early exposure to court life revealed that authority was rarely given freely. It had to be negotiated, performed, and sometimes claimed decisively. Each ritual, each public appearance, carried weight not only for immediate perception, but for historical record. Her marriage to Thutmose II positioned her within a network of power, yet it also constrained her. As great royal wife, she exercised influence within the court, participating in ceremonies, managing estates, and shaping alliances. These responsibilities, while significant, were circumscribed by the expectations of gender and tradition. Hatshepsut learned that authority could be cultivated without overtly threatening the established hierarchy, a lesson that would later define her reign. The early deaths of Thutmose II and other potential heirs created a vacuum. Hatshepsut, though female, had the training, intellect, and alliances to fill it, yet the path was perilous. Egypt had a long tradition of male pharaohs, and stepping into the role of ruler required careful management of perception. She had to assert her authority without provoking insurrection, and she had to do so in a society where divine legitimacy was intertwined with gendered expectations. Her strategies were deliberate. Hatshepsut employed titles, regalia, and ceremonial acts that signaled authority without overtly breaking tradition. She commissioned monuments, obelisks, and temples that reinforced her divine legitimacy. She aligned herself with powerful priests and officials, building coalitions that could support her rule. Her early years of preparation were crucial, a blend of performance, alliance building, and strategic visibility that would allow her to claim full power later. Yet despite these preparations, Hatshepsut faced skepticism and resistance. Advisors, nobles, and even members of her own family might question a woman's right to rule. Rumors, quiet opposition, and subtle undermining were constant threats. Authority in Egypt was both ceremonial and practical. Gaining acceptance required convincing both the gods and the people, the priests and the military, that her rule was legitimate. You notice how Hatshepsut's early story echoes patterns seen in other historical figures you have explored. Survival and influence often depend on understanding structures, shaping perception, and anticipating resistance. The balance between patience and decisive action is critical, as is the skill to wield power without provoking early collapse. Hatshepsut demonstrates that authority can be performed, yet must be substantiated by strategy, alliances, and visible achievements. By the end of this section, Hatshepsut has positioned herself at the threshold of unprecedented power. She is prepared to transition from queen and regent to pharaoh, fully assuming a role historically reserved for men. Her journey underscores the delicate interplay between legitimacy, perception, and influence. Yet the challenges ahead, resistance, political intrigue, and the necessity of shaping both memory and authority, remain unresolved. As you consider the opening of her reign, a question lingers: when a woman claims a position historically reserved for men, can legitimacy be constructed purely through skill and strategy, or does it always depend on broader acceptance that may never be fully guaranteed? You continue Hatshepsut's story at the pivotal moment when preparation meets opportunity and strategy becomes action. Following the death of Thutmose II, the succession of Egypt was uncertain. Her stepson Thutmose III was still a child, leaving the throne technically vacant or at least open to regency. Hatshepsut, already positioned as great royal wife and trusted advisor, seized the moment with a combination of caution, audacity, and calculated visibility. Her first challenge was establishing authority without provoking civil unrest. She assumed the role of regent for the young Thutmose III, presenting herself as a protector of dynastic continuity, rather than a challenger to tradition. Public rituals emphasized her role in maintaining matter, the divine order, linking her authority to religious legitimacy. Every ceremonial act, from temple offerings to royal proclamations, reinforced the notion that she was divinely sanctioned, acting not for personal ambition, but for the stability of Egypt. Yet Hatshepsut's ambitions extended beyond regency. She moved cautiously, commissioning monuments, temples, and inscriptions that subtly elevated her status. Statues depicted her in traditionally male regalia: the false beard, the kilt, and the ceremonial crown. These representations were not mere vanity, they were political tools, signaling to priests, officials, and foreign emissaries that she was pharaoh in every practical and symbolic sense. Art and architecture became instruments of authority, shaping perception long before action could enforce it. Administrative control followed. Hatshepsut cultivated loyal officials in the bureaucracy and military. She placed trusted advisors in key positions, ensuring that her directives were implemented efficiently and that opposition was minimized. This careful network management mirrored patterns seen in earlier stories. Influence is effective not when imposed through brute force, but when embedded in systems that govern daily life, loyalty, and decision-making. Her foreign policy reinforced domestic authority. Hatshepsut organized expeditions to Punt and other trade partners, bringing wealth, exotic goods, and prestige back to Egypt. These missions were meticulously documented in reliefs and inscriptions, highlighting her role as a provider and protector of Egypt's prosperity. Economic success strengthened her legitimacy and showcased the tangible benefits of her leadership, beyond ceremonial symbolism. The challenge of succession remained delicate. Thutmose III was growing older, but she could not simply dismiss his claim. Hatshepsut framed her authority as caretaker and guide, emphasizing continuity rather than disruption. She avoided overt confrontation while consolidating power. In doing so, she demonstrated a sophisticated understanding of political psychology. Power is most secure when it appears cooperative and legitimate, even when it is effectively absolute. You can also see the subtle risks inherent in her approach. Every monument, every ceremonial act, every policy decision invited scrutiny. Priests, nobles, and military leaders could interpret overreach as hubris. Legitimacy, while cultivated through skill and performance, remained contingent. The balance between influence and perception was delicate, and misstep could provoke immediate resistance or long-term erosion of authority. Hatshepsut's story during this phase illustrates a recurring theme in the lives of extraordinary women rulers. Authority often depends less on formal decree than on shaping perception, controlling narrative, and embedding influence within enduring structures. Power is exercised through networks, symbols, and subtle negotiation, as much as through direct command. Survival and dominance require both patience and decisive action. By the end of this section, Hatshepsut has effectively positioned herself as pharaoh in both perception and practice. She commands loyalty, directs policy, and projects authority throughout Egypt. Yet underlying tension remains. Her path to power, though masterfully executed, is continuously contingent on perception, acceptance, and the careful management of both internal and external threats. A lingering question arises: when power depends on subtle perception, ritualized symbolism, and conditional loyalty, is authority ever fully secure, or is it always provisional, vulnerable to shifts in belief, allegiance, or circumstance? You arrive at the culmination of Hatshepsut's story, at a point where her authority, carefully constructed over years, is both fully realized and constantly scrutinized. By this stage, she is no longer regent or placeholder. She is recognized as pharaoh, exercising authority that rivals any male predecessor. Her reign, lasting over 2 decades, demonstrates that power is not only inherited, but also performed, negotiated, and maintained through deliberate strategy and foresight. Hatshepsut's achievements are remarkable in both scale and subtlety. She commissions monumental architecture, most famously the mortuary temple at Deir el-Bahari, a structure that blends religious symbolism with personal legacy. These projects are carefully curated to emphasize her divine legitimacy, her role as provider and protector, and her place within the dynastic lineage. Every relief, statue, and inscription serves as both political statement and historical record, reinforcing her authority across generations. Her administration reflects the same attention to systems and loyalty that defined her earlier strategy. Trusted officials oversee provinces, trade expeditions, and military campaigns. Loyalty is secured through patronage, recognition, and integration into the broader goals of her reign. Hatshepsut demonstrates that enduring influence requires not only symbolic power, but also the embedding of authority within the structures that govern daily life, economics, and religious practice. Foreign policy is handled with equal sophistication. Expeditions to Punt and beyond bring wealth, exotic goods, and international recognition. Diplomatic correspondence and strategic marriages reinforce Egypt's prominence while securing alliances that bolster her legitimacy. Hatshepsut's reign is a balance of visible splendor and invisible control, ensuring that her authority is recognized both at home and abroad. Yet her position, while secure, is never uncontested. Thutmose III, the young heir she initially guided, remains a latent source of tension. Internal factions and ambitious courtiers continually test the limits of her authority. Hatshepsut manages these challenges with a combination of subtle manipulation, strategic inclusion, and, when necessary, decisive action. Her rule demonstrates that even absolute seeming power is contingent upon perception, loyalty, and careful management of rivals. The end of her reign introduces the persistent tension between memory and erasure. After her death, later rulers sought to minimize her legacy, defacing statues and removing inscriptions, likely to restore traditional male succession narratives. Yet her architectural and administrative accomplishments endure, a testament to her mastery of influence. Hatshepsut demonstrates that authority can be both constructed and contested, preserved in deeds, and yet vulnerable to reinterpretation by history. Her story echoes patterns seen in the other women you have explored: Agrippina, Theodora, Boudica, Zenobia, Cleopatra, Selene, and Cartimandua. Each navigated structures designed to limit them, exercised influence through strategy and perception, and faced threats from entrenched power. Hatshepsut's life illustrates that survival, legacy, and authority are inextricably linked to skillful negotiation, systemic embedding of power, and the manipulation of both symbolism and networks. You are left with a final thought-provoking reflection. When a ruler's authority is constructed through careful performance, ritual, and systemic control, is power defined by perception and acceptance rather than by inherent right? And does its security ultimately lie in the endurance of memory as much as in the reality of command?